Hey guys, it's Bales. I'm here at FantasyLabs, and I wanted to talk briefly about our stat called bargain rating, which is in the trends section on player models. And we actually also offer this for free, so anyone who signs up for the site, whether you pay or not, has access to bargain rating. You can't create models with it, but you can see the bargain rating. So um, for this week on draft, we're looking at DraftKings quarterbacks. Ryan Fitzpatrick has the highest bargain rating. It's also on his player card, 100, and basically that's a percentile rank from 0 to 100 of how much of a bargain uh, Fitzpatrick is on DraftKings relative to FanDuel. And the way that we calculate that is by looking at historic pricing differences between FanDuel and DraftKings at various salary levels, and then giving them a historic percentile rank based on that difference. So Fitzpatrick is 5,200 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he is 7,500. So huge difference. The two do have different um, ways that they price players, but that's still a huge difference. And it's one of the largest ever, obviously, because Fitzpatrick is in the 100th percentile in terms of how good of a deal he is on DraftKings versus FanDuel. So you can see that rating here and within player models. And I think it's really important. It's a stat that I created, and actually before Peter Jennings, CSU Ram 88, and I decided to produce FantasyLabs. We initially started another site that never really got off the ground that was based almost solely around looking at site pricing inefficiencies and differences. So we definitely think it's very, very important. Again, bargain rating located here in player models, and there's really two different ways that I use it. Number one, as a predictive tool. So I have bargain rating ranked pretty highly within most models. I have it higher for the more consistent positions, which I think are the most price sensitive. So quarterback over receiver, for example. And um, yeah, I do think that there's a lot of value in it. It's not going to capture every pricing inefficiency. So if DraftKings and FanDuel both have a player underpriced, for example, his bargain rating might not be that high. So it's not a standalone for value, but it is a really good tool. The second way that I use bargain rating, which I think is the most overlooked and really, really valuable, I'd argue it is maybe the number one thing that I think people overlook if they play on more than one site. So if you play only on DraftKings, for example, I still think bargain rating has value. You still want to look at players who are, if DraftKings has a player priced at um, $2,000 cheaper than FanDuel, probably his value falls between where the two sites are pricing him, and he's overpriced on FanDuel and underpriced on DraftKings. That's the most likely scenario since both sites are trying to price players accurately. But if you play on both, you can use bargain rating uh, to shop for players more or less. So if I like, let's say I like Ryan Fitzpatrick this week, and I like Matt Ryan, for example. Um, I don't, but we'll just say that I do. Fitzpatrick with a bargain rating of 100, I would want to get 100% exposure to him on DraftKings, whereas Matt Ryan with a bargain rating of 28, he's way cheaper on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. If that's a player who I like, um, and you can see that Matt Ryan isn't rated high in that DraftKings model, almost certainly he'll be rated higher on FanDuel because of, yeah, so he's sort of near the top there because of that pricing difference. But if I wanted to play Matt Ryan, where he has 74% bargain rating on FanDuel, I would want to get exposure to him there. So I think that um, if once you decide on the group of guys who you want to play, guys who you think are in good spots, it makes sense to see where they're the cheapest and get exposure to them there. So you're basically like shopping for lines in a way. And I do think that that's very, very important because it gives you a cushion, it gives you a barrier and margin for error. We're not perfect at making projections, so we want to um, pack in as much room for error as possible, and bargain rating allows us to do that probably better, I think, than any other tool. And it's also valuable because just looking at the players' salaries on different sites is also a bit misleading because um, there's different ways that DraftKings and FanDuel price players. So FanDuel has a higher floor generally, especially at running back, wide receiver, tight end than DraftKings. So when you want to go with those min priced guys, especially at receiver, you almost always want to play those guys on DraftKings. They're almost always going to have high bargain ratings because of FanDuel's salary floor, which is closer to 4,500, I think. Most guys who are playable are at least 5,000. Um, Whereas you can have playable guys on DraftKings, you can have a few that are in the 4,000. Sometimes in certain situations, they'll be priced in the 3,000s. So generally better to get exposure to those cheaper guys when you want to punt on DraftKings. And for the most part, the elite players, especially at the receiver position, are going to be have higher bargain ratings on FanDuel. That's why you almost always see those top guys come up in the models on FanDuel at the receiver position, whereas on DraftKings, it's almost always the cheaper guys, and that's really because of the deviation in pricing that each site employs at each position. Uh, so yeah, I think that bargain rating is a really, really useful tool. It's predictive, so if you play on one site, I would still incorporate it into your model. But it's also a great way to know where you should have exposure to certain players instead of just blindly playing them on both sites. And then you'll give yourself more room for error and ultimately a better return on your investment.